This husband dangled his wife over the edge of a parking garage. As a prank. She thought she was seconds from dying. And when she left him in shock and fear, he said she ruined the night. And that's just the first of today's unbelievable stories. We've got cheating scandals, explosive family feuds, shattered relationships, and emotional betrayals you won't see coming. These Reddit AITAH posts, they're messy, raw, and 100% real. So yeah, scratch that, hold on tight, because this lineup is absolute chaos from start to finish. Hey, what's up guys? Welcome back to AITA Chronicles, where every day we dig into the most jaw-dropping AITAH stories Reddit has to offer. If you're into drama, deep moral dilemmas, and moments that'll have you yelling, "What were they thinking?" You're in the right place. Our big goal, 10K subscribers, and if you're watching this, you're already part of that journey. So hit that like button, subscribe if you haven't yet, and let's dive straight into today's madness. Title: Am I the asshole for going home after my husband dangled me over the parking garage edge as a prank and I thought he was killing me? Alright, here we go. A couple of days ago, the writer and her husband went out for dinner. They had booked the place in advance, a restaurant he had been excited about for a while. Writer even drove them there, parked on the top floor of the parking garage nearby, and everything seemed normal. They got out of the car and started making their way down the stairs, the ones placed dangerously close to the edge of the garage, with only a small railing separating them from a deadly drop. As they walked, her husband started chatting about how high up they were. He joked, asking if she thought she could survive if she jumped. Of course, they both knew she wouldn't. It should have just stayed a dumb comment, but it didn't. As they turned the corner on the stairs, right at the edge, her husband suddenly yelled, "Say goodbye!" And without any warning, grabbed Ryder, picked her up, and dangled her over the side. She screamed, pure terror, ripping through her throat before she even had a chance to think. She wasn't laughing. She wasn't joking. Her brain was screaming, "He's going to kill me." For that horrifying second, Ryder genuinely thought her life was over, dangling helplessly over a concrete abyss, completely at the mercy of someone who was supposed to protect her. And then, just like that, he pulled her back and put her down, laughing, as if it was all one big hilarious joke. Ryder was frozen, trying to catch up with what had just happened. Meanwhile, her husband, still chuckling, completely oblivious to the absolute terror he had just unleashed. She was shaking, her body literally reacting to the trauma. There was no salvaging the night after that, no fancy dinner, no casual conversations. All she wanted, all she could want, was to go home. She told him, straight up, she was leaving. He could either come with her or figure his own way back, but she was not staying another second. And how did he react? Not with concern, not even with confusion. No, he got angry, accused her of ruining the night he had been so excited about, as if dangling her over a parking garage like some twisted joke was supposed to just roll off her back, as if she was the one who wrecked everything, not him. Ryder called the restaurant to cancel. They drove home in a heavy, miserable silence, and when they got there, the weight of it all finally hit her. She broke down crying, alone. He didn't even come to comfort her. No hugs. No, "I'm sorry I scared you so badly." When he finally did apologize, it was half-hearted, a weak, "sorry you got scared," like her reaction was the real problem, not his dangerous, reckless behavior. And now Ryder sits here, questioning herself, wondering if she was somehow wrong for leaving, wondering if she overreacted to being dangled over the side of a parking garage by the person she trusted most. But let's be honest here, she wasn't wrong. She wasn't being dramatic. She wasn't ruining anything. She was surviving. Because when someone who's supposed to love you turns a moment of trust into a nightmare, you don't sit around pretending everything's fine. You get the hell out of there. Trust isn't just about big moments. It's about small ones too. The moments where you feel safe without even thinking about it. He didn't just break that trust, he shattered it. And frankly, he's lucky all she did was go home. Because some people, they wouldn't have just ended the night. They would have ended the whole relationship. Title: Am I the asshole for telling my wife to mind her own business about our neighbor's weight loss? All right, let's get into it. So the writer and his wife live next door to a woman, mid-40s, who up until recently carried a few extra pounds. Not obese, not unhealthy looking, just a little plump. The kind of thing you might notice if you paid attention, but also the kind of thing that, frankly, isn't anyone else's business. Lately, though, the neighbor's been slimming down, noticeably. The writer picks up on it, of course, anyone would. But he doesn't say anything, because, again, it's her body, her business, her life, simple as that. His wife, though, she's not as good at letting things lie. She starts theorizing, whispering about how their neighbor must be taking one of those new weight loss prescriptions, Ozempic, Wegovy, whatever's trending these days. And to be fair, maybe she is. Maybe she isn't. But the point is, it doesn't matter. Writer's wife goes a step further. She tells the neighbor, you better not lose too much weight too fast, thinking she's being helpful, maybe even flattering. But the writer, he sees right through it. He knows his wife isn't just giving casual advice. She's fishing for confirmation, fishing for gossip, fishing for details that the neighbor clearly hasn't offered up voluntarily. So later, when it's just the two of them, Writer pulls his wife aside. He tells her, plain and simple, mind your own business. She's a grown woman. She knows what she's doing. If she wants to talk about it, she will. And if she doesn't, that's her right too. And how does the wife take it? With grace? Understanding? Not quite. She snaps, yells at him, basically saying she'll say whatever she wants, whenever she wants. As if personal boundaries are some kind of optional suggestion rather than basic human decency. And here's the thing. Writer wasn't trying to pick a fight. He wasn't trying to embarrass his wife. He was just trying to remind her some things are sacred, privacy is sacred, dignity is sacred, and no good ever comes from poking around in someone else's personal life just because you're curious. He reminds her again, mind your own business. We know she's probably on something. Fine, but maybe, just maybe, she doesn't want to be labeled the woman who needed medication to get thin. Maybe she just wants to feel good about herself without all the commentary. And really, isn't that something everyone deserves? But still, after all this, the writer's left wondering, am I the asshole here? Am I wrong for wanting to protect the neighbor's privacy instead of feeding into my wife's nosiness? And honestly, no, not even close. Because valuing someone's privacy, respecting their personal choices, isn't just polite, it's humane. It's recognizing that not everything we notice needs to be commented on, that not every curiosity deserves to be satisfied. And here's the kicker. Writer wasn't even the one obsessing about the neighbor's choices. It was his wife who stirred all this up. It was his wife who assumed the worst, then poked and prodded for answers she wasn't entitled to. Writer understood something fundamental that too many people seem to forget. Not everything is about you. Not every story needs your commentary. Not every change in someone else's life requires your investigation. Sometimes the kindest, the most decent thing you can do is just smile, nod, and mind your own damn business. And honestly, the neighbor is probably better off never knowing that behind those casual greetings, there were people trying to decode her every pound lost. Because her journey, whatever it looks like, belongs to her and nobody else. Title, Am I the Asshole for Buying My Boyfriend Flowers After He Mentioned Most Men Only Get Them When They Die? Let's dive into this emotional roller coaster. The writer, 21F, and her boyfriend, 22M, had been together for about 5 months. Still early days, but deep enough that you start to think about the little things, the gestures that show you're paying attention. And recently, during a quiet moment at his apartment, the boyfriend let something slip. He told the writer that most men only ever get flowers when they're dead. A heavy statement, right? It wasn't just a passing comment either. He ranted a little. How women don't always show affection the same way, how men crave those moments of being seen, being cared for, too. And the writer? She listened, really listened. She heard the unspoken words. She took it not as a complaint, but as a hint, a little crack in his armor where love could pour in. So the next day, filled with nothing but excitement and pure affection, she set out to make something special. She went to Whole Foods, took her time, picking out flowers she thought he would love. Not just flowers either. She grabbed coffee, white chocolates, a few extra thoughtful gifts. This wasn't random. She knew his love language was gift giving. She knew how much these things mattered to him. This wasn't a grand apology. It wasn't manipulation. It was love. Simple, sweet, pure love. She shows up at his apartment, her heart practically bursting with excitement. Huge smile on her face, gifts in hand, ready to make his day. But the second he sees the flowers, everything crumbles. His face twists into something unrecognizable. Discomfort, suspicion, maybe even anger. He pulls away from her touch, won't look her in the eye. The warmth she expected, it's gone. Just like that. Confused, the writer asks him what's wrong. And then, like a punch in the gut, he explodes. He accuses her of cheating, flat out accuses her, tells her flowers are only for apologies, that if she's trying to cover something up, she better just confess now. Imagine that. Standing there with your arms full of love, only to be slapped across the heart with distrust. The flowers? He takes them, walks them right into the kitchen and throws them in the trash. As if they were trash. As if she was trash. He tells her to get out. Calls her names no one should ever hear from someone they love. And every time she tries to speak, to explain, to reach him, he cuts her off. No excuses. Tell me who it is. Demanding a confession for a crime she never committed. The writer leaves, heartbroken, confused. Was she wrong? Was buying flowers really something only cheaters do? She spirals, second-guessing everything. And it's so important to pause here because this right here, this is what emotional manipulation looks like in real time. You pour your heart out, and when it's smashed, you wonder if you're the one who dropped it. But then there's an edit. The writer starts reading the responses. People rally behind her, opening her eyes, and she starts to realize he's not worth it. Not even close. She reaches out one last time to try and talk. And what does he say? Finally ready to confess or what? No growth, no reflection, no remorse. They schedule a lunch. Maybe she thinks there's still something worth salvaging. But before that, another twist. His mother reaches out. She wants to call. The mother, the sweet woman who's always loved the writer, wants to talk. And the writer, against the knot of dread in her stomach, agrees. And what unfolds during that call? It's even worse than she imagined. Both him and his mother are on the line. He cries. Real tears. He says he hasn't been happy, that the writer isn't what he wants. Turns out he has a timeline. He wants to date for 6 months and then get engaged, a plan he never once mentioned before. And the real kicker? He says he wants someone less career-focused, someone ready to have kids and stay home, someone who aligns with his suddenly revealed traditional ideals. And somehow he blames the writer for not fitting into that mold, for not becoming what he silently expected her to become. Oh, and the flowers? They weren't just about cheating to him. No, he twisted it further, claiming they were emasculating. That being treated with tenderness made him feel less than. And if that wasn't enough, he pulled out the final insult, accusing the writer of being a radical feminist because she's pro-choice and ambitious and doesn't apologize for it. At that point, the writer had heard enough. She realized with crystal clarity that this relationship was dead. Not because she failed, but because he needed her to be someone she could never and should never be. She told him no. No to changing. No to shrinking herself down into something smaller and quieter and more wife material. She hung up, lunch canceled, relationship over. And though her heart was shattered, though she cried until there were no tears left, she knew deep down she chose herself. And isn't that the bravest thing of all? Because love, real love, it never demands that you become less. It never demands that you doubt your own goodness just because someone else can't see it. The writer gave love, pure and beautiful. And when it was rejected, she walked away with her dignity intact. Title: Am I the asshole for telling my brother's wife to stop whining about me giving the family the first grandkids? All right, let's get into this one because, wow, this is a storm with a capital S. The writer, a 29-year-old woman, is living what should be one of the happiest chapters of her life. She and her husband, 30 years old, are expecting twins. Not just one miracle, but two. And for anyone who's been through pregnancy or knows someone who has, you already know the amount of love, hope, and yes, vulnerability that comes along with it. Now, here's where it gets a little complicated. While the writer is close to her husband's family, people who treat her with love and respect, her own family, not quite the picture-perfect postcard. The writer's mother had always dreamed of 3 boys, a little fantasy she clung to. And when the writer came along after her 2 brothers, N, 30M, and T, 32M, it was almost like she was seen as the mistake, the one who didn't fit the plan. Just imagine growing up with that kind of cloud hanging over your head. Out of the 2 brothers, N isn't that bad. He and the writer even talk occasionally, mostly thanks to the shared bond of the gym scene he shares with her husband. But T, the older brother, not a good history there. He bullied the writer when they were kids, relentlessly picking on her asthma, her place on the autism spectrum. Real cruelty, the kind you don't just forget, even after the apologies dry up or the years roll by. And when the writer got married, she made the choice, an act of quiet bravery, not to invite T or his wife. And honestly, after a childhood like that, can you blame her? Naturally, her mother wasn't happy, threatening not to come at all, until her father had to step in and tell her to quit playing favorites. And even then, during the wedding, her mother sat there in silence, as if forced to be part of a moment she should have been celebrating. Now, fast forward to the present. The writer announces she's expecting twins, the first grandkids and the first twins in the family. You'd think this would be a moment of pure joy, right? Celebration, tears of happiness, hugs all around. Wrong. Enter the brother's wife, the queen of attention, the self-proclaimed main character of every room she walks into. She had long declared that she and her husband had to be the ones to deliver the first grandchild, that it would be their baby to crown the next generation. She had it all planned out, even wanted it to happen right after the honeymoon. But here we are, 4 years later, and still no pregnancy. And when the writer's news comes out, oh, it's not just jealousy, it's rage. The brother's wife doesn't just sulk or send a passive-aggressive text. She erupts, full meltdown, yelling, screaming, throwing objects like a child denied a toy at a store. She accuses the writer of being selfish for not waiting for her to get pregnant first, as if life events come with a reservation list you need to check before moving forward. And then the cruelty escalates. She calls the writer the unwanted girl, accusing her of stealing her spotlight, of robbing her of her right to be the family's first mother of the next generation. Can you imagine standing there just trying to share your joy and being screamed at like you committed a crime? The writer, fed up with the circus, tells her to stop whining, to stop acting like she's special when life, in its messy, unpredictable way, had other plans. And honestly, somebody needed to say it. But the brother's wife didn't stop there. No, she crossed a line so vile it's impossible to ignore, calling the writer's husband a racial slur. At that moment, something inside the writer snapped. She punched her right in the face. And you know what? Given the circumstances, it's hard to sit here and claim there wasn't a justified rage bubbling beneath that action. Her father and husband had to pull her away, while the brother's wife, suddenly playing the victim, bursts into tears, screaming that the writer doesn't deserve children. And here comes the family again, right on cue, scolding the writer. Her mother tells her she should have been the bigger person. But how are you supposed to be the bigger person when someone attacks your partner with hatred? When someone tries to poison what should be one of the most beautiful moments of your life? Now, the same brother who bullied her growing up is threatening to press charges. He's telling her she could lose custody of her unborn twins over this. And the writer, our writer, is sitting there terrified, questioning herself, wondering if she just jeopardized the future she's been dreaming about, wondering if standing up for herself and her husband somehow made her the villain. Her husband, bless his heart, calls her a baddie, reassuring her that she isn't at fault. Still, that doubt lingers, because when you've spent a lifetime being treated like you're always less than, it's easy for those old scars to start whispering again, maybe you were wrong. So now, she turns to the one place so many of us go when we're lost in the noise of our own self-doubt, Reddit. And she asks, am I the asshole? Let's be clear, no, she is not the asshole. Not for announcing her pregnancy, not for defending herself against a woman who hurled racist slurs at her husband, not for refusing to let someone else dictate her life's milestones. This isn't about petty jealousy. This isn't about being the bigger person. This is about basic human decency, something her brother's wife threw out the window the minute she decided that her infertility gave her the right to verbally assault someone else's family. The writer stood up for herself. She stood up for her husband. And honestly, in a family dynamic where she's been silenced and sidelined for years, that's not something to feel guilty about. If anything, it's something to be damn proud of. Title: Am I the asshole for telling my future mother-in-law I won't wear her old wedding dress on my big day? Oh, buckle up, because this one, it's something else. The writer, a 29-year-old woman, is standing at the edge of what should be one of the happiest seasons of her life, planning her wedding. Exciting, right? Only, when you dig a little deeper, you realize that what should be a fairy tale engagement has become a twisted game of dodging landmines, and the biggest one of all, her future mother-in-law. Now, the writer is marrying Peter, a 27-year-old man she loves. A good man, but one with a glaring flaw. He's a textbook mama's boy, and not the harmless, sweet kind who calls his mom once a week. No. Peter is the kind of mama's boy who lets his mother's wishes seep into every corner of his relationship, even places where she has absolutely no business being. From early on, there was tension brewing under the surface, but the issue really exploded over something seemingly simple: a wedding dress. You see, Peter's mother, a 51-year-old woman who clearly still sees herself as the star of the show, has been absolutely fixated on the writer wearing her old wedding gown. She brings it up again and again, almost like a proud heirloom being passed down. And if that were the end of it, maybe it could have been manageable. But here's where things tip straight into the nightmare zone. Peter's mother has openly bragged multiple times that she and Peter's father had sex while she was wearing that wedding dress on their wedding night. And horrifyingly, on several occasions after that. Let that sink in for a moment. This isn't just an old dress with sentimental value. It's a garment with layers of unsettling memories stitched right into its seams. And now, somehow, the writer is expected to smile and walk down the aisle wrapped in all of that? Absolutely not. Despite telling Peter repeatedly, and very reasonably, that she didn't want anything to do with the dress, the issue just wouldn't die. It all came to a head during a visit to Peter's parents' house. Sitting there in what should have been a normal, maybe even pleasant family gathering, Peter's mother casually chirps up about how excited she is to see the writer marry her precious son in her dress. The writer, standing her ground, tells her bluntly, no. She's told Peter. She's made it clear. She will not be wearing the dress. And how does the future mother-in-law respond? She storms off, full-on tantrum mode, like a child who just got told they couldn't have a second dessert. Then, Seal, Peter's 24-year-old sister, decides to pile on, saying she would be honored to wear their mother's dress, throwing a not-so-subtle jab at the writer's refusal. The writer, keeping her composure, tells her plainly, great, you go ahead, but I won't. And then the dog pile begins. Peter, Phil, and Sil all ganging up on her. Imagine that. The people who are supposed to be welcoming her into their family instead turning on her, making her feel isolated, attacked, like she's the unreasonable one. Later, back home, Peter decides to try a different tactic. He asks the writer if she likes the sweater she's wearing. She says yes. Why wouldn't she? And with this smug, calculated smirk, he tells her, it used to be my mom's. The audacity, like he's trying to trick her. Like this is some twisted loyalty test. Without hesitation, the writer rips off that sweater and throws it away, making it crystal clear she will not be a doll to dress up in his mother's memories. She tells him that if there are any other clothes he's given her that used to belong to his mom, he can just send them right back. And what does Peter do? He decides to sulk. He refuses to sleep in the same bed with her. He punishes her for not bending to this deeply disturbing pressure. At this point, it's not just about a dress anymore. It's about respect. It's about boundaries. It's about whether Peter sees the writer as his partner or just another extension of his mother. And the writer, she finally sees it for what it is. She sends him a message telling him they need to talk. but she already knows. It's over. Her final words are heavy and honest. He can go f himself or f his mom. I'm not here to satisfy his sick kinks. And honestly, good for her. Because it takes incredible strength to walk away from a situation where everyone is trying to gaslight you into thinking you're the crazy one for simply saying no. So now she turns to Reddit, asking the question that's been weighing on her heart. Am I the asshole? And the answer, shouted from rooftops, whispered through every ounce of common sense, is a resounding no. She is absolutely, without question, not the asshole. If anything, the writer deserves applause for standing up for herself in a house full of people who thought they could wear her down. This isn't just about a wedding dress. It's about dignity, about refusing to become a prop in someone else's warped fantasy. She protected her future self, she protected her peace, and in doing so, she made the bravest, smartest choice she could have made. Title: Am I the asshole for refusing to babysit my autistic nephew, even after he was dropped off? This isn't just a story. This is the kind of heartbreaking crossroads where love, guilt, and fear all crash into each other, and nobody walks away clean. The writer, a 28-year-old woman, finds herself being painted as the villain of her own family, and for what? Setting a boundary to protect her home, her peace, and her daughter. At the center of it all is her older sister, 32 years old, and mother to 3 kids, a 12-year-old son with autism, a 10-year-old son, and a 4-year-old daughter. The writer loves her niece and nephews dearly. Make no mistake about that. This isn't a story of resentment or hatred. It's a story of heartbreak. Because when it comes to her oldest nephew, the one with autism, the situation is complicated. He's nonverbal, relying on a communication device to express his needs. He struggles with violent outbursts, sometimes turning that rage inward, sometimes lashing out at the people around him. Her sister, she's an incredible mother. No one denies that. She handles her son's needs with the kind of grace and patience that can only come from living it every day. But what she doesn't seem to see, what she refuses to see, is how overwhelming and even dangerous those outbursts can be for everyone else. Now, the writer's home had become something of a second home for the kids this past year. Her daughter, just 3 years old, had formed a close bond with her 4-year-old cousin. Her stepson and her 10-year-old nephew, best friends, practically glued at the hip over video games and backyard sports. Life was busy, loud, and full of laughter, the way it should be. But then, the cracks started to show. At first, it was small. Frustrated tantrums from her oldest nephew when his iPad would die. Screaming fits that rattled the walls but would eventually fizzle out with a mumbled sorry signed through trembling fingers. The other kids would scatter to other rooms, giving him space. And the writer? She did her best to stay calm, to be patient, because this was family. But then came the day everything changed. It was an ordinary afternoon, or at least it was supposed to be. The younger kids were outside, playing under the spring sun when it happened. The writer was sitting with her daughter and her oldest nephew on the patio, enjoying the rare stillness. And then, explosion. Out of nowhere, her nephew hurled his iPad to the ground with a force that shook the air around them. He began screaming, a guttural, primal sound. The writer, startled but still trying to keep the peace, moved to pick up the iPad, hoping to redirect him inside and avoid a full meltdown. But before she could even react, he shoved her hard into a patio chair and spit on her. Her heart barely had time to register the shock when she saw it. Her 3-year-old daughter, sweet and small, bending down to pick up the fallen iPad, and in an instant, her nephew lashed out. He pushed her tiny body to the ground. He kicked her, a 3-year-old, kicked and sprawled across the patio floor like a rag doll. The writer's stepson and younger nephew came running, managing somehow to calm him down, but the damage was already done. Her daughter ended up with a sprained wrist. And the writer? She ended up with something far worse. A permanent crack in her heart where trust used to be. Her sister was apologetic. She really was. She took the writer's daughter out for ice cream for shopping, tried to smooth it over, and for a while it seemed like they could move past it. But inside the writer could never forget the image of her daughter crying on the ground, clutching her wrist. and no apology, no shopping trip could erase the fear that lived in her gut now. Since that day, the writer had drawn a line. The younger two were still welcome, always. But her oldest nephew? She just couldn't take that risk again. Not with her daughter, not with her stepson, not with herself. Her sister didn't take it well. She insisted the kids were a package deal, that separating them was cruel. The writer held firm, and then came Easter. In front of the entire family, her sister blindsided her, accusing her of being bigoted toward her autistic nephew over one little outburst. One little outburst? A 3-year-old was kicked to the ground, a woman was spat on, and yet somehow the writer was the villain. The rest of the family, parents, siblings, piled on. They downplayed everything. It's nothing. You're being evil. He didn't mean it. No one, not one person, stopped to think about the fear, the helplessness the writer had felt that day. No one thought about her daughter. And just when she thought it couldn't get worse, it did. Her sister called in a panic, needing a last-minute babysitter for all 3 kids because her brother canceled. The writer stood her ground. The younger two, yes. The oldest, no. Her sister didn't listen. She pulled up to the house with all 3 kids in the car as if sheer guilt would force the writer to cave. But the writer? She walked right up to that window, looked her sister in the eye, and told her to leave. It wasn't out of hatred. It wasn't out of cruelty. It was out of love, the fierce kind, the kind that says, my child's safety comes first. Her sister sobbed, begged, accused her of ruining everything, of making her late, of punishing her whole family over one mistake. But the writer stayed firm. Because here's the thing. This wasn't just about one mistake. This was about trust that had been shattered, about fear that hadn't been addressed, about boundaries that needed to be respected, not bulldozed. And now, her phone blows up with angry calls and texts. Her family paints her as the monster. And yet, the writer knows, deep in her heart, that she's not evil. She's not cruel. She's a mother. And a mother's first duty is to protect her child. Her husband stands by her. He sees what so many refuse to see, that a 12-year-old going through puberty, who already has a history of violent outbursts, is not the same as a toddler throwing a tantrum. That real harm is possible. That boundaries are not cruelty. So now the writer asks, almost with a trembling hand, am I the asshole? And the answer is clear. No, she is not the asshole. She is a mother who chose to protect her child when no one else seemed willing to. She set a boundary that was hard but necessary. And in doing so, she proved something vital. Love doesn't mean sacrificing your safety. Family doesn't mean tolerating fear. And protecting your own child will never, ever make you the villain. Am I the asshole for leaving my husband after he refused to help with our child? The writer, a 29-year-old woman, begins her story with a backdrop that, from the outside, would seem like the start of a dream. She and her husband, now 30, had been together for a full decade, 10 long years of shared history, laughter, struggles, and what she thought was teamwork. They built a life together. They built a family. They had a beautiful little girl, now 3 years old. But sometimes the cracks don't show until you're standing right at the edge of them. When their daughter was born, the writer was working a full-time office job, juggling the demands of professional life and new motherhood as best she could. But life had other plans. She was blindsided by severe postpartum depression, not just the baby blues people so casually throw around, but a deep, consuming fog that made even the simplest tasks feel impossible. It was a darkness that settled in her chest and refused to leave. Realizing something had to give, she stepped down to part-time work. It was supposed to be a lifeline, a way to stay afloat mentally while still contributing financially. And on paper, it made sense. They could survive without her full paycheck. They could avoid daycare costs. Maybe things would get easier. But what she didn't realize was that by stepping back from her career, she was stepping into a role where every single responsibility would quietly land on her shoulders. From the moment she clocked out of her full-time job, she clocked into another: full-time motherhood, full-time housekeeper, full-time scheduler, full-time everything. She took over the cleaning, the groceries, the cooking plans. She remembered birthdays, pediatric appointments, school events. She was the safety net. The emotional sponge, the planner, the caregiver. Her husband's only contributions? Cooking dinner and occasionally breakfast. That was it, 2 meals a day at best. But somehow that was deemed his fair share. The writer didn't immediately collapse under the weight. She's strong. She kept going because that's what mothers do, right? They endure. They sacrifice. They convince themselves that maybe tomorrow will be easier. But day after day, exhaustion set deeper. Depression tightened its grip. She wasn't recovering. She was drowning. She asked him for help, not demands. She opened herself up, vulnerable and desperate, saying, "I can't do this alone. I need you." And for 2 fleeting weeks at a time, he would step up, tidy up a room here, change a diaper there, only to slide back into apathy with the excuse that he was too tired from his 40-hour work week, as if her endless, unpaid work somehow counted for less. The tipping point came slowly, then all at once. The writer realized that if she wanted to survive, not just exist, she needed more. More support, more financial stability, more respect. She needed to take her life back, piece by piece. She found a new job, a full-time role that paid more than her part-time work, even after factoring in daycare costs for her daughter during remote days. It was a practical, hopeful step toward reclaiming control over a life that had spun far from what she once imagined. But when she shared the news with her husband, when she came to him, heart open, excited, and maybe even a little proud, he didn't celebrate. He raged. He wasn't angry about logistics. He wasn't worried about scheduling. He was angry that she had made a decision for herself, angry that she dared to change the dynamic without his permission. And worse, he coldly declared that he would not be lifting a single extra finger to help. He told her flat out not to expect anything from him beyond cooking dinner. No morning routines, no daycare drop-offs, no brushing their daughter's teeth, no picking out clothes, no packing lunches, nothing. When the writer, still clinging to hope that some sliver of partnership remained, asked if he could at least help with one small task, brushing their daughter's teeth in the morning, he refused. Not because he physically couldn't, not because he was overwhelmed, simply because he chose not to. He snapped at her that this was her doing, that she made this bed and now she could lie in it. The cruelty wasn't just in the refusal, it was in how easily he dismissed her pain, her needs, their daughter's well-being. It was in how he acted like parenting was a punishment rather than a privilege. And the writer stood there, realizing if she had to carry the mental load, the household, the childcare, the full-time job, and now even the cooking, then what exactly was the point of being married? What partnership was left? If he wouldn't even help brush their daughter's teeth, what future did they have? Divorce wasn't a rash thought. It wasn't a dramatic reaction. It was the quiet, heartbreaking conclusion that had been building over 3 years of neglect. Because at the end of the day, love isn't enough when respect is gone. A home isn't a refuge when you're the only one holding up the walls, and a marriage isn't a partnership when you're standing there alone. So now the writer asks, am I the asshole for leaving a man who refuses to be a father, a man who refuses to be a husband? And honestly, no. Choosing herself, choosing her daughter, choosing a future where she isn't trapped under the weight of someone else's apathy, that isn't selfish. It's survival. It's strength. It's finally saying, I am worth more than this. Am I the asshole for publicly calling out my coworkers mansplaining during my presentation? The writer, a 24-year-old woman, has spent the last 2 years carving out her place in a tech startup, a place where, like far too many others, the conference rooms echo a little louder with the sound of men's voices. She loves her job. She believes in her work. But being one of the very few women in a male-dominated field has been, at best, an uphill climb, and at worst, a constant battle to simply be heard. Last week, there was a big meeting scheduled, an important one. It was about an upcoming project the team was about to launch, and the writer had poured weeks of preparation into her presentation. She had researched every angle, double-checked her data, rehearsed her delivery. This wasn't just another meeting for her. It was an opportunity to show her expertise, her ideas, her value. But as she stood there clicking through her carefully crafted slides, it became clear. This moment wasn't going to unfold the way she hoped. Because there he was, A male coworker, mid-30s, sitting there with his arms crossed, a slight smirk tugging at the corner of his mouth. And before she could even finish a full thought, he jumped in. "Actually," he said, cutting across her sentence like it was nothing. The writer tried to keep her cool. Maybe it was a one-off. But then came another, and another. Well, technically, he'd start dissecting minor, irrelevant details, twisting her words, as if the only way he knew how to contribute was by challenging her 5 times. 5 separate interruptions. 5 times she had to pause, to recalibrate, to wrestle the conversation back under control. And here's the thing, this wasn't new. This man had a history, a pattern. He never interrupted the men. He never nitpicked their words. But when it came to the women in the office, suddenly he became an expert in every field, a self-appointed professor correcting lectures no one asked for. And in that 5th interruption, something inside the writer snapped. Not with anger, no, with clarity. She stopped, mid-presentation. She turned toward him, looked him dead in the eye, and said, calmly but loud enough for the whole room to hear, "If you interrupt me one more time, I'm going to start a tally on the whiteboard of how many times you've done it, and we can all analyze the pattern after the meeting." The words hung in the air like a storm about to break. The room went absolutely silent. You could hear the hum of the fluorescent lights, the nervous shuffle of someone adjusting in their seat. The boss, sitting near the back, looked deeply uncomfortable, but said nothing. As for the coworker, his face turned the color of a stop sign. Suddenly, the interruption stopped. He folded into himself, staying silent for the rest of the writer's presentation. And finally, she was able to finish what she started without being dissected mid-sentence. After the meeting, something even more telling happened. A few of her female colleagues, quietly, almost apologetically, approached her. They thanked her, whispered about how often the same thing had happened to them, how often they had bitten their tongues, how often they had wanted to say something but didn't dare. But of course, not everyone was pleased. Her boss pulled her aside. His words were heavy with that careful, rehearsed corporate tone. He understood her frustration, he said. He sympathized, but she had embarrassed a team member and should have handled it privately. Privately. As if she hadn't already tried, twice. 2 separate conversations behind closed doors where she calmly explained how the interruptions undermined her, distracted the team, made it harder for her to do her job. And what had changed? Nothing. But now, when she defended herself publicly, suddenly she was creating drama. Funny how that works. Her boss even suggested she apologize. Apologize for standing up for herself after every other method had been exhausted. The writer refused. She drew a line. She decided her dignity wasn't something she owed an apology for. Now the office is tense. Conversations slow when she walks by. People glance sideways, uncertain, whispering in corners. And even though part of her wonders, did I go too far? Another part knows the truth. She was asked to play nice in a system that only asked her to stay quiet. So the writer asks, am I the asshole? For calling out a man who thought her voice was his to interrupt? For demanding the respect she had already earned? The answer feels simple to me. No. Respect isn't a bonus you earn only after you stay quiet long enough. It's the baseline, it's the bare minimum. And when people refuse to offer it, when private conversations go unheard, when patience is met with more disrespect, you are not the villain for saying enough. The writer didn't create the tension. She didn't create the drama. She simply refused to carry it alone anymore. And maybe, just maybe, that silent tension in the office, that uncomfortable pause, it's not a sign that she did something wrong. It's a sign that maybe, just maybe, people are finally being forced to sit with the consequences of their own behavior. Am I the asshole for playing a voice recording to prove to my friend her daughter isn't nonverbal? The writer, a 30-year-old woman, runs a small in-home daycare, a place built on trust, patience, and a whole lot of love for the little ones she cares for. She watches several kids throughout the week, including the 3-year-old daughter of a close friend. We'll call the little girl Allie. Now, when Allie's mother first brought her into the writer's care, there was no mention of special needs. Nothing about speech delays, nothing about Allie being nonverbal. The contracts, detailed and thorough, even included a section specifically asking about such needs, and it was left completely blank. At first, Allie was quiet, reserved. The writer figured it was nothing more than the shy nerves of a toddler adjusting to a new environment. Nothing unusual. Kids can take time to open up, especially in a brand new place surrounded by unfamiliar faces. But soon enough, Allie's sweet little voice started popping up here and there. Small words at first, simple phrases, a whispered toy, a giggled more snack, a quiet hi when arriving in the morning. These weren't grand speeches, no, but they were words. Honest, clear attempts to communicate. One day, as the writer slipped into the bathroom, door cracked open just a sliver to keep an ear on the kids. Ally toddled past, scrunched up her little nose, and chirped out, "Ew, you stinky!" The writer couldn't help but burst into laughter. It was adorable, it was genuine, and honestly, it felt like a huge milestone. Proof that Ally was comfortable enough to joke, to tease, to speak. At pickup that day, the writer excitedly shared the story with Allie's mom, expecting laughter, maybe even a little pride. But instead, she was met with anger. "She isn't verbal. Why would you mock her?" Her friend snapped, her face hard and unyielding. Stunned, the writer tried to explain, gently, reassuringly, that she wasn't mocking Allie at all, that she was genuinely proud of the progress she'd seen, that Allie had spoken, and not just once. But her friend wouldn't hear it, wouldn't believe it. It stung. It felt like being accused of something ugly when all she had wanted was to celebrate a child's growth. The writer, not wanting to cause more tension, let it drop. She didn't press the issue. She tucked her pride away quietly, the way so many of us do when confrontation feels heavier than it's worth. But the seed of doubt had been planted, and quietly, carefully, the writer made a decision. She would record Allie's voice. Not her face, not in a sneaky or malicious way, just a small audio clip. Proof, if it was ever needed, that she hadn't imagined it. Days turned into weeks. Her friend eventually said it was water under the bridge, brushing past the uncomfortable moment as if it had never happened. She even invited the writer to Allie's birthday party, a sign, it seemed, that the friendship was still intact. The writer, relieved, buried the voice recording in the back of her mind. Life was busy. Allie was thriving. No need to stir the pot. But fate, as it often does, had other plans. At the birthday party, surrounded by balloons, cake, and the cheerful chaos of children, the writer found herself chatting with some of Allie's relatives. Light conversation turned to funny kid stories, and without thinking, she shared a sweet anecdote about the clever things Allie had said during story time. The room chilled almost instantly. The woman she was speaking to, Allie's aunt, snapped, "She's nonverbal. Why are you lying?" Voices rose. Accusations flew. Suddenly, it wasn't just the aunt, it was Allie's mother too, shouting, berating, cornering her in front of a room full of strangers. The writer, who had spent years caring for children, who had 2 disabled children of her own, who understood deeply what it meant to honor a child's experience, felt a knot of fear twist in her stomach, and something inside her broke. Tired of being called a liar, tired of being treated like she had bad intentions, tired of standing alone with the truth trapped in her throat. She pulled out her phone and with trembling hands played the recording. A tiny voice filled the space. Allie, laughing, saying her name, talking about her favorite animal. The room fell silent, the kind of silence that feels heavier than any scream. Shock, embarrassment, disbelief. Her friend's face twisted in anger. "You crossed the line. How dare you record my daughter? Get out." The writer left the party, heart hammering, guilt clawing at her. She hadn't meant to embarrass anyone. She hadn't meant to cause a scene. She just wanted to defend herself against a storm she hadn't started. In the days that followed, the guilt gnawed at her. She knew that recording a child without permission wasn't the best move. She understood professionalism, ethics. She wasn't proud of how it had all played out. She apologized profusely to the family. She admitted she could have handled it differently. But at the same time, when you're pushed into a corner, lied about, attacked for telling the truth, how many chances are you supposed to give someone before you stand up for yourself? The writer is making changes. Cameras are being installed at her daycare for full transparency. Contracts are being updated to make expectations crystal clear. She's even consulting with child services to make sure everything is handled by the book, because she refuses to let a moment of chaos undo all the good she's built. So she asks, am I the asshole for defending herself with proof when lies and accusations left her with nowhere else to turn? My take? Absolutely not. The writer didn't create this situation. She simply refused to keep carrying the weight of someone else's denial. And sometimes when the truth is messy, when it's uncomfortable, when it rattles the stories people want to believe, it's easier to blame the person speaking it than to confront the reality staring them in the face. The writer wasn't the villain that night. She was just the only one willing to say what everyone else refused to see. Am I the asshole for making my sick husband clean up his vomit? The writer, exhausted, overwhelmed, and running on fumes, had spent the last few days holding her entire household together. 2 young children under the age of 5, a home to maintain, and a husband completely laid out with what can only be described as a nightmare stomach bug. Vomiting, diarrhea, nausea, the works. While her husband was curled up on the couch, moaning and miserable, the writer kept everything afloat, alone. She changed diapers, prepared meals, comforted crying toddlers, sanitized surfaces, and played nurse without a word of complaint. Because that's what you do when someone you love is suffering, right? But even the most patient caregiver has their breaking point. This morning, there was a flicker of hope. Her husband felt well enough to nibble on something. Toast. Simple. Harmless. The writer dutifully made it for him, barely pausing her whirlwind of breakfast preparations for their toddlers. One kid was demanding more milk, the other was trying to climb the kitchen counter, and through it all, the writer juggled it like the seasoned mother she was. Then, it happened. From the living room came the unmistakable sound of violent gagging, that wet, awful sound that makes your heart sink, especially when you're already stretched paper thin. Now, the writer wasn't careless. She had set up a trash can next to her husband for exactly this reason. A safety net. A lifeline. She even called out, reminding him, use the trash can or head to the bathroom if you feel like you're going to throw up. But her words might as well have floated into thin air, because instead of using the trash can or rushing to the bathroom, her husband threw up. All over the floor. And not just a little. It splattered onto the couch, seeped into the carpet, a grotesque, stinking mess. And then, her husband, barely wiping his mouth, shuffled into the kitchen where she was feeding their babies and said, in the most casual tone imaginable, I'm gonna go lie down, you can clean it up. As if it was just another chore to be casually dumped on her mountain of responsibilities. As if her arms weren't already full, literally and figuratively, juggling 2 toddlers and a crumbling household. Something inside the writer snapped, not with rage, not with cruelty, but with a bone-deep exhaustion that screamed, enough. She turned to him, calm but firm, and said, absolutely not. Because this wasn't an accident. This wasn't a sudden sickness striking without warning. He had time, he had choices, and he chose to ignore them. The writer had spent the entire weekend silently cleaning up every surprise mess. No complaints, no lectures. But this was avoidable, and it wasn't fair to expect her to simply bend over backward again while their toddlers cried for their breakfast. Her husband didn't take it well. He huffed off to the bedroom, wounded pride in tow, muttering about her supposed lack of good bedside manner. And honestly, that stung a little. Because if anyone had been patient, nurturing, and selfless all weekend, it was the writer. The guilt tried to creep in, as it often does when women, especially mothers, finally set a boundary. Was she being too harsh? Should she have just cleaned it up and kept her head down like always? But deep down, the writer knew. Taking care of someone doesn't mean letting them treat you like you don't matter. Later that day, the snide comments started. Little jabs about her being a bad wife, about how anyone who loved their spouse wouldn't punish them when they're sick. Punish? What about everything she'd done tirelessly for days on end? Where was the gratitude for that? Fed up with the gaslighting, the writer did what many of us only wish we had the courage to do. She pulled up the post she had written on r/AmITheAsshole and showed him the mountain of support pouring in from strangers all over the world. And finally, her husband shut his mouth. There's something incredibly powerful about seeing reality reflected back to you through hundreds of voices saying, "You're not crazy, you're not cruel, you're allowed to have limits." For those wondering, no, the writer and her little ones didn't get sick. Turns out her husband likely gave himself food poisoning by eating something that had been sitting out for nearly 24 hours in his work break room. Honestly, after all that chaos, it almost feels like karma in its pettiest form. And through it all, the writer remained steady. Tired? Yes. Frustrated? Absolutely. But never cruel. Never heartless. She set a boundary and stuck to it, even when guilt tried to gnaw at the edges. Because sometimes loving someone doesn't mean cleaning up every mess they make. Sometimes love looks like saying, "You're capable, you made a choice, now you need to be responsible for it." And that isn't being an asshole. That's being human. So, am I the asshole for refusing to clean up after someone who could have helped himself? Absolutely not. In fact, I'd say the writer is a damn hero for showing that even in the trenches of motherhood and marriage, boundaries still matter. Am I the asshole for snapping when someone rubbed my belly and implied I might be pregnant? The writer was just trying to enjoy a simple moment. A little break from the humdrum of office life. It was supposed to be an easy, lighthearted afternoon, a fiesta-themed event, free lunch, a small gathering to shake off the monotony of another endless workday. Standing in line, with the casual chatter of coworkers buzzing around her, the writer instinctively pulled out her phone to check her Nest camera. And there it was, that small, familiar comfort. A tiny bird, her daily visitor. A sweet, fleeting reminder that sometimes, in the middle of chaos, the universe sends you a small moment of peace. She smiled, laughed even, and without aiming it at anyone, casually said, "This bird comes to visit me every day." Just a light, happy comment thrown into the air. Harmless, innocent. But then, it happened. Before she could even register what was going on, a coworker, the same one who had already crossed lines before, came up to her, uninvited, unprompted, and rubbed her belly. Rubbed. Belly. At work. In public. Without permission. And to make it even worse, she laughed and said, "Maybe it's because you've got a baby bird on the way." That moment, it wasn't just awkward, it wasn't just inappropriate, it was a violation. A complete disregard for the writer's boundaries, her autonomy, her basic right to exist without being treated like public property. There was no warning, no asking, no thought, just an assumption, a deeply invasive, deeply personal assumption about her body, her life, her future. As if a woman's body is forever open to commentary, as if a woman's worth is somehow always tied to whether she's carrying a child. And honestly, it's 2025. Why are we still doing this? The writer felt the rage hit her like a freight train, fast, overwhelming, and completely justified. Without thinking, from that deep place inside that fights to protect itself, she snapped, "Don't be wishing that kind of bad luck on me." Sharp, blunt, unapologetic. And immediately the air changed. Her coworker recoiled like she'd been slapped. Her boss, who had been within earshot, looked at the writer like she was the one who had crossed a line. Suddenly, in the blink of an eye, the roles were reversed. The writer, who had been violated, was now the one being silently judged. That creeping, awful feeling, the one so many of us know too well, started to slither in. Was I overreacting? Was I too harsh? Did I make it weird? Am I the problem here? But here's the raw truth. The writer wasn't crazy. She wasn't cruel. She was standing up for something that should never have even been a question. Her right to her own body. Her right to exist without unsolicited comments and touches. Because no matter how friendly someone thinks they are, no matter how harmless they claim their words to be, your body is not a conversation starter. And pregnancy? Pregnancy is one of the most deeply personal journeys a person can experience. Not a joke, not an icebreaker, not a casual assumption to be tossed out during lunch. To make matters worse, the writer clarified, she is not overweight. She does not even remotely appear pregnant, which only makes her coworker's behavior all the more bizarre and all the more invasive. And yet, there were still people, strangers from the shadows of the internet, trying to turn the situation around, nitpicking her body, trying to find a way to blame her for someone else's inappropriate actions. But the truth remains stubborn. This wasn't about appearances. This wasn't about a joke gone wrong. This was about a complete disregard for basic respect. At the heart of it all, the writer was simply defending her dignity. She was drawing a hard, necessary line and saying, "My body is not your business." And if the cost of that is a few uncomfortable looks, if standing up for yourself means someone feels awkward because they got called out, so be it. Because respect for boundaries, real, honest, grown-up respect, should never be optional. So, am I the asshole for snapping when someone crossed the line, touched me without permission, and made a deeply personal comment about my body? Absolutely not. In fact, the writer showed a level of courage most people only wish they could summon when the moment demands it. In a world that often expects women to stay quiet, to laugh things off, to not make it weird, the writer refused to play along. She chose herself. And honestly, that's something to be proud of. Am I the asshole for ruining my boyfriend's family dinner by bringing my own food? The writer, at 28 years old, has navigated life with a set of invisible but absolutely real burdens: severe food allergies, gluten, dairy, shellfish. 3 ingredients that, for the average person, might be nothing more than a tasty part of a meal, but for the writer, they are potential landmines. One wrong bite, one moment of casual dismissal, could turn a pleasant evening into a dangerous, terrifying ordeal. Now, the writer had been dating her boyfriend for about a year. Long enough, you'd think, for his family to be well aware of these risks. Long enough for them to understand that these weren't trendy diet preferences or being picky. This was about survival. When the invitation came for a big family dinner, the writer did exactly what any considerate guest would do. She communicated. She reminded her boyfriend's mother, politely, respectfully, that she had serious allergies, and she was met with a reassuring, confident promise. "Don't worry, we'll have something for you." Simple, right? A small gesture of thoughtfulness, a basic kindness, a promise that should have allowed the writer to walk into that dinner with trust, with hope, that she'd be included and cared for. But when she arrived, that hope crumbled almost immediately. Every single dish, every plate laid out with pride, every carefully arranged tray, every lovingly prepared dish contained something the writer couldn't eat: gluten, dairy, shellfish, hidden in the sauces, baked into the sides, stirred into the entrees. No safe harbor anywhere on that table. And in that moment, standing there with the buzz of conversation around her, the clinking of glasses, the heavy smell of food thick in the air, the writer was faced with a brutal, lonely decision. Make a scene, or sit there hungry and silent. But the writer had come prepared. Quietly, discreetly, she pulled out a simple Tupperware container, a meal she had carefully made at home, free from danger, free from fear. She wasn't making a show of it. She wasn't waving it around, drawing attention. She was just trying to eat safely, to exist in a space that had clearly not made room for her. But of course, it wasn't going to go unnoticed. Her boyfriend's mother spotted it almost immediately, and the offense on her face was unmistakable. She was hurt, offended, as if the writer's very existence, her right to eat safely, was a personal insult to her cooking skills. The passive-aggressive comments followed, the pointed looks, the coldness. Later that night, the real blow came when the writer's boyfriend, the very person who should have been standing in her corner, accused her of embarrassing him, said she should have just eaten around the allergens to keep the peace. Eat around them, as if a little gluten or dairy wouldn't hurt, as if the writer's allergies were just a nuisance to be politely ignored for the sake of appearances, as if her health was less important than not upsetting his mother. Imagine for a moment the absurdity of it. Expecting someone to gamble with their health just to avoid making someone else feel bad about their food. Expecting someone to risk hives, anaphylaxis, days of misery just to keep the atmosphere pleasant. No, the writer did the only rational thing she could do. She protected herself. Because at the end of the day, no matter how nice the table looks, no matter how many smiles are plastered on faces, no matter how much pressure there is to keep the peace, your health is not negotiable. And frankly, it's not just about food. It's about respect. It's about being told with actions, not just words, that your needs matter, that you matter. The writer wasn't being difficult. She wasn't making a scene. She was surviving in a situation that made it painfully clear her well-being wasn't a priority. And her boyfriend's response? To side with appearances over her safety? That, honestly, says more about him than it ever could about her. Because the truth is, if someone can't handle you taking basic life-saving precautions without being embarrassed, they don't deserve a seat at your table. So, am I the asshole for bringing my own food to a dinner where I was promised a safe meal and given nothing? Absolutely not. The writer showed strength, she showed grace, and she showed that sometimes the quietest act of standing up for yourself, pulling out a simple Tupperware meal at a hostile table, can be the loudest declaration of self-worth. Am I the asshole for not taking down my yard flamingos after neighbors complained? There's a particular kind of pride that comes with finally having a space to call your own. For the writer, buying that house, investing time, energy, and care into turning it into a home was no small thing. Every garden bed that was planted, every weed that was pulled, every little improvement made to the yard, it wasn't just about aesthetics. It was about putting a personal stamp on something that belonged to her, a space that was hers and hers alone. And then came the flamingos. Bright, cheeky, playful. 2 little plastic flamingos found at a greenhouse, tucked between racks of serious plants and somber stone planters, practically begging to be taken home by someone who understood their charm. The writer didn't hesitate. She saw them, smiled, and knew immediately. They belong with me. When she set them up in her freshly tended front garden, it wasn't just a decoration. It was an act of joy, of claiming happiness, of saying, this is my home, and it will reflect the things that make me smile. But, as always, some people simply cannot bear to see someone else living freely. It didn't take long before a knock echoed on her front door. There, standing stiff and disapproving, was a neighbor, eyes narrowed, voice sharp with indignation. She called the flamingos gauche, a word soaked in judgment, as if joy itself was somehow distasteful. She claimed the birds were lowering the property value of the entire neighborhood, as if 2 plastic flamingos had the power to crumble foundations and topple mortgages. And you know what the writer did? She stood her ground. No HOA, no town ordinance, no obligation to bend to anyone's fragile sensibilities. The flamingos would stay because they mattered, because joy matters. But the neighbor wasn't content to leave it at that. No, she escalated. She took to the town's Facebook group, posting pictures, stirring the pot, inviting public judgment in a place where pettiness often disguises itself as community concern. Some voices agreed, of course. There's always a few ready to cluck their tongues and wag their fingers, as if the sight of 2 pink birds is a threat to civilization itself. Another neighbor even came knocking, trying to push the writer to back down. Even her own mother urged her to remove them. Keep the peace, she said. Keep the peace? At what cost? Because here's the thing, it's never just about the flamingos. It's about control, it's about conformity. It's about the way small-minded people can sometimes confuse order with life and mistake uniformity for community. The writer wasn't hurting anyone. She wasn't blasting music. She wasn't leaving trash everywhere. She wasn't doing anything but celebrating a bit of harmless whimsy on her own property. But in neighborhoods like this, the mere act of being different is enough to make you a villain. And yet, through all the noise, through the Facebook posts, the passive-aggressive comments, even the disapproval from those closest to her, the writer stayed firm. Because every time she pulled into that driveway, tired after a long day, those flamingos were there to greet her. Not with judgment, not with scowls or demands, but with pure, unapologetic joy. And really, isn't that worth protecting? So, am I the asshole for refusing to take down my flamingos just because a few sour-faced neighbors decided my happiness was an eyesore? Absolutely not. If anything, the writer is a rare kind of neighbor. The kind who brings a little color, a little light, a little laughter to a street that clearly needs it. In a world where so much feels gray and heavy, where so many people forget how to smile at something silly, those flamingos are a rebellion against misery. They are a declaration. Here, in this little patch of the world, there will be joy, whether you like it or not. And honestly, We need more of that. Am I the asshole for being relieved that my rapist killed himself? There are some things that never truly leave you. Wounds that don't quite heal, memories that don't fade no matter how much time passes. The writer of this story isn't asking for sympathy. They're asking for clarity, for peace, for someone to tell them that this impossible feeling, this strange weight in their chest, doesn't make them a monster. The writer begins by saying they feel guilty, not because they are sad about a death, but because they aren't. Not really. They're grieving. But it's not sorrow that fills the space, it's something else. A strange, hollow relief. The man in question, let's call him what he is, was the writer's rapist. He was 3 years older than the writer. When he was 9 or 10 years old and the writer was only 6, he began a pattern, a routine, a horrifying ritual of abuse committed again and again every time the writer visited his home. This wasn't some one-time, confusing childhood mistake. It was repeated, calculated. He would hide with the writer in places where no one could see or hear, under the bed, in a closet, anywhere small and dark enough that the writer couldn't escape. And even though they ran, even though they cried, even though they said no, it kept happening. The assaults were so violent, so constant, that the writer ended up with a physical infection. But that wasn't the worst part, because years later, when time had passed and life had supposedly moved on, the writer saw him again, on Christmas Day, of all times. And you'd think maybe he would carry some shame, maybe even remorse. But no. Instead, he looked them in the eyes, smiled, and joked about it. He remembered everything and thought it was funny. He turned their trauma into a punchline. "I remember being super P. Diddy when you were little," he said, smirking, as if what he'd done was cute, a memory. Not a crime, not a wound that never stopped bleeding. Let that sink in for a moment. Years of carrying that kind of pain, and when the writer finally saw the man who caused it, he laughed. That's the kind of emotional whiplash that shatters something inside you. And then, not long after that, he died. Suicide, a self-inflicted gunshot wound. The writer's parents broke the news casually, never knowing what this man had done to their child. And when they found out there had been plans for the writer to spend time with this man again, alone in a hotel with his parents, but those plans were canceled because he took his own life. That's when the guilt set in, not guilt over what he did. Guilt for feeling relief, because for the first time the writer felt safe from him, permanently. There would be no more awkward family gatherings, no more forced smiles, no more fear that the past would repeat itself behind closed doors, no more wondering what he would say, or worse, what he would do. And now the writer sits in silence, asking themselves a question no one should ever have to ask. Am I the asshole for feeling relieved that he's gone? Let's be perfectly clear. No, absolutely not. The burden of that guilt doesn't belong to the writer. It belongs to the boy who became a predator, the teenager who never took accountability, and the man who weaponized a survivor's trauma for a laugh. The writer didn't wish him dead. They wished for peace, for distance, for safety. And his death, though tragic in its own way, simply happened to offer that. This isn't about revenge, it's about reclaiming control, about finally breathing without the weight of him standing in the corner of every room. The writer didn't take anything from him, but he took so much, and if his absence finally gave them back a sliver of peace, that doesn't make them cruel, that makes them human. So, no, the writer is not the asshole, not for feeling relief, not for surviving, not for existing in the messy, contradictory space between grief and freedom. Sometimes the hardest thing isn't surviving trauma, it's surviving the guilt that comes after. And to anyone listening who has ever felt the same way, your feelings are valid. Your peace matters. You did nothing wrong. Am I the asshole for asking my half-siblings and their mother why I'm supposed to care that my father cheated on her? Let's talk about betrayal. Not the kind you see in movies with slammed doors and shouting matches, but the slow, aching kind. The kind that rewrites your childhood. The kind that leaves you standing alone looking at people who call themselves family, wondering how the hell you're supposed to pretend this is all okay. The writer of this story? She's 25 now. But rewind the clock. and she was just a child, grieving, confused, blindsided by tragedy. Her mother went from relatively healthy, just asthma, to gone in 3 weeks. That's all like the flu, pneumonia, death. And while she was losing the most important person in her world, her father, he was with another woman. Not just any woman either, his mistress, the very woman he's now married to. The woman who stood beside him not at a funeral, not in a hospital room offering comfort, but before all that, in secret behind closed doors while his wife was dying. Think about that for a moment. Now imagine being a child in that storm. You don't just lose your mother, you lose the version of your father you thought existed. He doesn't just remarry, he marries the other woman and does it in months, not years. Months. So the writer does what any heartbroken daughter would. She shuts him out. And his new wife, she becomes a symbol, not just of betrayal, but of everything that went wrong, of everything that collapsed when the foundation of her world caved in. She tried, to some extent, to bond with her half-siblings. They were just kids, after all. But even that bond had its cracks, because how do you truly connect with children being raised by the woman who helped tear your family apart? And now, the wheel has turned. The man who betrayed his dying wife has done it again. He's cheated on his second wife. The one who once stood by while he was stepping out on his first marriage. And now, she's the one crying. She reaches out to the writer in tears, wanting sympathy, wanting comfort. The same woman who knowingly got involved with a married man. The same woman who stood by that man's side while his daughter lost her mother. And the writer, she doesn't have it in her to fake it. No comforting words, no shared sorrow, just a blunt, brutal truth. Go to hell. That's when the half-siblings get involved. They're teens, 14 and 15, and they're angry, confused, hurt, not because of what their dad did, but because of how the writer responded. Because she didn't comfort their mom. Because she didn't show up, offer a shoulder, play the part of the good big sister. But how can you be a sister to people who don't understand the depths of your pain? How do you show up for someone who never showed up for you, who in your mind helped destroy your family? So the writer asks the question, the one that sits heavy in the air, why am I supposed to care that your mother was cheated on? It's not meant to be cruel. It's a question soaked in years of unspoken grief. It's not about joy in her suffering. It's about the audacity of her asking for comfort from the very person she helped shatter. The half-siblings try to defend their mom. They say she never hurt the writer, never did anything to her, but they don't understand. Because betrayal doesn't always leave visible scars. Sometimes it's a presence, a silence, a woman who smiled in your direction while building her life from the ruins of yours. And then comes the guilt trip, the plea for empathy. You should care, she's our mom. You should care for us. But that assumes the writer still has room to give, that she hasn't been carrying too much already. When they tell her they don't want her as a sister, if she can't show empathy for their mom, she doesn't argue. She simply walks away, quiet, cold. And when the woman herself, the second wife, steps in and says the writer shouldn't talk to kids like that, the response is firm, final. Then don't let your kids bring me into this, because there's only so much a person can carry. And the writer, she's carried enough. So, is the writer the asshole for asking in front of her half-siblings why she's supposed to care? No, she's not. This wasn't about gloating. It wasn't about revenge. It was about self-preservation. About standing her ground in a story where her voice was silenced for far too long. Her pain was never acknowledged. Her grief was rushed, overshadowed by a new marriage, a new family, a new chapter she wasn't invited to join. She didn't owe comfort to the woman who was part of her family's destruction. She didn't owe softness to the man who chose infidelity over fatherhood. And she didn't owe understanding to siblings who still can't comprehend the full scope of what she endured. Not the asshole. Not even close. Sometimes the truth is uncomfortable, but in a story where everyone else chose convenience, the writer chose honesty. And that's not cruel. That's survival. Am I the asshole for buying myself something expensive right before my friend's wedding? Let's rewind to the heart of it. This is a story about loyalty, timing, and perception. But more than anything, it's about how easily intentions can be twisted by assumptions, especially when money is involved. So the writer, someone who considers herself a good friend, is getting ready for a major milestone in her circle. One of her best friends is tying the knot, and like any tight-knit group, they've made a pact, not just to show up, but to go above and beyond. They agreed to hold off on any big personal spending so they could pool resources. Extra surprises, something memorable for the honeymoon, a thoughtful gesture rooted in love, in friendship. The writer was on board, all in. But then, life throws a curveball. A harmless one, but a curveball nonetheless. She checks an old account. You know the kind. You've probably got one too. An account you stopped thinking about. Maybe it had a few bucks in it, maybe it was close to empty. But when she logged in, there it was. More money than she expected. Money she had completely forgotten about. It wasn't part of her main finances. It wasn't the group fund. It wasn't earmarked for the wedding or even the essentials of life. It was just sitting there, waiting. Almost like a quiet gift from the universe after a brutal year. So she bought herself something she'd been wanting for a long time. A watch, not flashy, not over the top, but special. Around $1,500, yes, a lot, but not life-changing. Not irresponsible, and certainly not at the expense of her promise to the group. In fact, she still planned on contributing her full share to the wedding gifts. That never changed. She wasn't backing out. She wasn't suddenly ghosting the agreement. She just had a moment, a rare, spontaneous, joyful moment for herself. And then, someone found out. Now here's where the real tension begins. Not because she betrayed anyone, but because of how it looked. One friend got wind of the purchase, and suddenly, everything shifted. The tone, the attitude, the whispers. She wasn't just a bridesmaid with a watch anymore. She was selfish. She was breaking the agreement, like she'd committed some quiet betrayal, like she had the audacity to do something for herself in the middle of a celebration that apparently demanded complete self-denial. And here's what hurts. She didn't lie. She didn't hide. She didn't refuse to pay her part. She'd just tell anyone because it wasn't their money. It wasn't their business. But now it's suddenly a group vote on her character. They're making it sound like she's robbing the wedding fund, like her personal joy is a threat to the collective happiness. But really, she just made a purchase that in her mind didn't break any promise. So let's pause here. Let's sit in the mess of it for a moment, because this isn't just about a watch. It's about how quickly people forget your intentions the moment it's convenient. It's about how one choice, even a harmless one, can make others uncomfortable simply because it doesn't fit into their narrow idea of loyalty. Let's be real. If the writer had gone out partying, posted pictures with a $2,000 handbag, and then claimed she couldn't pay her wedding share, then we'd be having a different conversation. But she didn't. She had the money. She used a portion of it. And she still planned to show up for her friends, emotionally and financially. So why the outrage? Because sometimes people conflate control with friendship. They believe that support means self-sacrifice, that any joy not shared is somehow selfish. But it isn't. Boundaries don't make you a bad friend. Treating yourself doesn't make you disloyal. So now the writer is stuck wondering, was I actually wrong? Was she the villain for buying something with her own forgotten money? For treating herself quietly after surviving a difficult year? For not making her life revolve entirely around someone else's big day? The answer is no. Not the asshole. Not by a long shot. The real issue here isn't the purchase. It's the lack of grace from her so-called friends. It's the assumption that joy must be rationed, that every cent spent must be policed. Friendship is about trust. And the writer didn't break that trust. She honored her word. What she did break was a hidden expectation that she would put her entire life on pause for someone else's moment. That's not fair. That's not real friendship. That's performance. So let's stop pretending like people need to explain every decision that brings them happiness, because in the end, the writer chose herself for one brief moment and still chose her friends too. And that's not selfish. That's balance. Am I the asshole for correctly guessing my friend's baby's sex? Sometimes, it's not what you say, it's when you say it. And maybe even more importantly, it's how it makes people feel, whether you meant it that way or not. This isn't a story about gender reveals or baby names. This is about tension that simmers under the surface of expectations. It's about the emotional minefield that comes with hope, especially the kind that builds quietly in someone's heart, the kind they don't fully say aloud, but still desperately cling to. The writer. Let's start there. A 39-year-old man on his way to a gender reveal party with his wife. Simple enough, right? The couple in question, friends of the writer and his wife, already have 2 boys. And in a moment of casual car talk, just as they're driving over, the writer's wife turns to him and asks the kind of question that seems harmless at first. What do you think the baby will be? Now, here's where things start to twist. The writer, a man wired to lean on logic, turns to statistics. He tells his wife that biologically the odds slightly favor a boy. About 105 boys are born for every 100 girls. It's nothing personal, nothing emotional, just numbers. His wife, however, gently suggests they already have 2 boys, she says, hoping maybe, just maybe, this time nature would offer some kind of balance. Maybe they were due for a girl. Maybe life owed them that. But to the writer, those previous births meant nothing. He stuck to the odds. To him, it was a 51% chance of another boy, plain and simple. So they arrive at the party. Balloons, cupcakes, smiles painted on like frosting. You know how these events go. Laughter that covers nerves, people filming on their phones, anticipation buzzing in the air like static, and then pop, confetti, blue. It's another boy, and in that moment the atmosphere shifts, subtly but undeniably. The expecting mother tries to smile, and maybe she even pulls it off for a while. But the disappointment is there, just beneath the surface. A disappointment that isn't rooted in resentment for her unborn child, but in a quiet grief for the daughter she had imagined. The daughter she'd maybe already started picturing in soft dresses and bedtime stories, the one she'll now never meet, even the writer's wife. She feels it too. That heavy pang of dashed hope, not just for the mother, but for the idea that this moment could have gone another way. And on the ride back, that's when the real storm begins. The writer's wife, she's upset. Not because of the outcome, not really, but because he said it. Because he made the whole thing sound so clinical, so inevitable, like it was never even possible to hope for a girl. She accuses him of being unsupportive, of treating an emotional moment like a math problem. And here's the part that really stings. The writer wasn't trying to be cruel. He was just answering a question the way he understood it, rationally. He wasn't mocking anyone or making light of their feelings. But what he failed to see in that moment was the emotional currency behind that question. Because when someone asks, what do you think it'll be? Sometimes they're not asking for logic. They're asking you to hope with them, to imagine a possibility, to dare to believe in a dream that might not come true. But the writer didn't offer that. He gave data, he gave probability, and even though he was technically correct, he guessed right. The truth is, it wasn't about being right. It was about being present, about being tender with someone else's silent hope. So now, he's sitting with this question. Am I the asshole? Was he wrong for being honest? For using facts to answer a seemingly simple question? For making what felt to him like a completely innocent comment? On the surface, no. He didn't insult anyone. He didn't make jokes. He didn't rub it in. But underneath that, there's another layer. A more delicate truth. You can be right and still hurt someone. You can be logical and still miss the heart of the moment. And you can love your friends, love your partner, and still accidentally step on a nerve you didn't even know was there. So is the writer the asshole? Not exactly. But maybe he missed the mark. He wasn't wrong for guessing. But maybe in that moment he could have held space for something softer than statistics. For the fragile hope of a mother who just wanted something different. For his wife who wanted to believe in magic more than math. Because at the end of the day, sometimes people don't want you to be right. They want you to believe with them, even when the odds say otherwise. Am I the asshole for keeping my son away from my mom because she fed him custard? Family. It's supposed to be about unconditional love. Trust. A bond deeper than words. But sometimes Sometimes, those very ties that are meant to protect can become the ones that press hardest against your most vulnerable points, especially when it comes to your own child. The writer and his wife, both in their 30s, had recently welcomed their baby boy into the world. A new life, a fresh beginning. And like so many new parents, they had laid down clear, carefully thought out boundaries. No sugar before the age of 1, no spoon feeding. They were embracing baby-led weaning. It wasn't just some whim. These were choices made with care, research, and love. And here's the thing about boundaries. They exist to protect relationships, not destroy them, but only when they're respected. The writer and his wife traveled across the country to attend a family reunion and visit his parents, a huge, exhausting endeavor with a small baby in tow. Things were going fine until they weren't. In one quiet, devastating moment, the writer's wife caught his mother, a woman who had been told over and over what the boundaries were, trying to feed their infant custard off a spoon. It wasn't an accident, it wasn't a misunderstanding, it was a choice made fully aware that it violated the parents' wishes. And when confronted, what did she say? Not an apology, not remorse. She said, "Because I knew you'd say no." That's not a misstep, that's defiance. That's a conscious decision to put her own desires over the trust placed in her as a grandparent. Imagine how that feels for a new mother, already exhausted, hormonal, trying to keep her tiny, vulnerable baby safe. Imagine what it feels like to realize that someone you should be able to trust with your child's life just decided their wants mattered more. It wasn't just about the custard. It was about respect, about trust that was now cracked, maybe even shattered. The writer and his wife tried to address it. They sat down for a mature conversation. They didn't storm out, didn't cut ties on the spot. They tried. But what did they get in return? Gaslighting, excuses, minimizing. Suddenly, it wasn't a spoon, it was a fork. Suddenly, the baby had reached for it. Suddenly, they were being dramatic. And when their voices rose, because who wouldn't be emotional in that moment, suddenly the story became that the wife had screamed. This wasn't an apology, it was a rewriting of events, an erosion of truth. And so, the writer and his wife pulled back, the daily photos stopped, the endless streams of videos paused, not out of spite, but out of self-protection. And still, they didn't slam the door shut. They offered a path forward, an exercise, a chance for reflection. They even extended the possibility of attending their son's first birthday if that work was done. But again, the writer's mother chose her pride over connection, refusing to even get dressed for a video call, refusing to engage face-to-face, turning what could have been a moment of healing into yet another wound. At some point, it stops being about a single spoonful of custard. It becomes a pattern, a question of, can we trust you at all? And when you're a parent, that question isn't just about hurt feelings anymore. It's about safety. It's about responsibility. In therapy, the writer and his wife reflected. They decided that to have any future relationship, the writer's parents needed to seek therapy themselves, to show a commitment to change, to accountability, to growth. And what did they get in return? More references to the screaming, more uncertainty, yet somehow, still, requests for photos of the baby they were unwilling to make the effort to truly know and respect. So here the writer sits, keeping casual conversation open, but holding the line firm on visits and photos until real change happens. And now the writer asks, am I the asshole for holding this boundary until therapy happens? And asks on behalf of his wife, is my wife the asshole for yelling or for cutting off daily photos after what happened? Let's be clear, no, they are not. This isn't about being punitive. This isn't about grudges. This is about protecting their son. About saying we will not gamble with our child's well-being because it's easier to look the other way. About realizing that sometimes the hardest thing you can do, the thing that feels cold or cruel, is actually the kindest thing in the long run. Because respect isn't optional, trust isn't negotiable, and family, true family shows up when it's hard, not just when it's easy. The writer and his wife offered olive branch after olive branch. They tried conversation, reflection, even structured exercises, and each time their efforts were met with resistance, dismissal, or emotional manipulation. At some point, you have to stop reaching out a hand if it keeps getting slapped away. So no, writer, you are not the asshole. You are a parent who loves your child enough to fight for his emotional safety, even when that means making the painful choice to draw a hard boundary with the very people who should have been your biggest allies. And as for your wife, she wasn't screaming, she was standing up for her son and for herself in the face of betrayal. Sometimes protecting your family means disappointing your extended family, and that's a sacrifice good parents are willing to make. Am I the asshole for refusing to try on the wedding dress my mom bought me without asking? Weddings are meant to be magical, aren't they? They're supposed to be the culmination of love, of identity, of you stepping fully into your own story. Every detail, the venue, the music, the dress, it's all supposed to reflect the person at the heart of it. So when the writer, a 28-year-old woman, recently got engaged, it wasn't just a milestone, it was a dream unfolding. A chance to finally step into that iconic moment so many imagined for years. Choosing the dress. Her dress. A decision that isn't about fabric or lace or price tags. It's about expression, autonomy, her voice. But what happens when someone else decides that your voice doesn't matter? The writer didn't get asked. There wasn't a heartfelt invitation to go browsing together. No call asking for Pinterest boards or favorite silhouettes. Her mother, 56, and by all accounts, someone deeply invested in the wedding, Megan, made the decision. She bought the dress, a whole wedding gown, and didn't say a single word. No grand reveal, no sentimental surprise. No, the writer stumbled across it on her own, tucked in the back of her childhood closet like some unspoken decision already made for her. Just imagine that for a moment. You're reaching for an old sweater, maybe something packed away for the season, and there it is. The dress, the one meant to define your wedding day, hanging silently, waiting, uninvited. And to make matters worse, it was nothing like what the writer would have chosen. Big, poofy, straight out of a royal fantasy. The kind of gown you'd expect in a fairy tale with castles and tiaras, not in the personal, grounded celebration the writer envisioned for herself. Not once had her mother asked what she liked. Not once did she wonder what kind of bride her daughter wanted to be. It wasn't just a misstep, it was a moment that screamed, "This isn't really about you, is it?" And it's that feeling, that slow burning sting of invisibility that cuts the deepest. The writer's older sisters, oh, they got their dress moments, the shopping trips, the champagne, the joyful tears in front of the fitting room mirror. But for the writer, it was just silence. A closed door. A decision made and hung in a closet like a formality. And now, her mother is upset, calling her ungrateful, complaining that she won't even try the dress on, like as if slipping into something she never wanted, never asked for, and doesn't even like, is the magic fix for a wound that runs so much deeper than tulle and satin. And of course, the chorus begins. Just try it on, they say. Make her happy. As if the writer's happiness is somehow optional. As if this moment, this milestone that's supposed to belong to her, should now be about someone else's feelings. Let's be clear here. This isn't about a dress. It's about being erased from your own experience. It's about autonomy, about not being given the dignity of choosing how you show up on what's supposed to be one of the most meaningful days of your life. The writer didn't refuse out of spite. She didn't throw the dress out or confront her mother in a rage. She just didn't try it on. She drew a line. She said, "This isn't what I want, and I wasn't given a say." That's not selfish. That's someone finally taking back a little bit of control in a situation where they weren't offered any. And when people rush to guilt her, because guilt is always the go-to weapon in families like this, it's worth asking, why is the burden always on the one who's been hurt to smooth everything over? And let's not forget, this wasn't even at the writer's home. This happened in her childhood room at her parents' house, where she sometimes stores off-season clothes. That's when she found it. No grand moment, no gift wrap, just a quiet invasion of what should have been a joyful choice. As for the price, the writer doesn't even want to know. She didn't ask for this. And if it turns out her mother spent hundreds or even over 1,000 on something done without a conversation, that's not on the writer. That's not a gift. That's control, dressed up in silk. In her own words, this wasn't about money. It was about not being included, about feeling like her preferences didn't matter, about watching her sisters be celebrated and realizing she was being managed instead. So now she turns to the internet to ask, am I the asshole for refusing to try it on? And my answer, like so many of yours out there, is no. Not in the slightest. This isn't about a stubborn bride. This is about a woman standing in her power, saying, this is my moment, my dress, my voice. Because if you can't even choose your own wedding gown, then what else are you being asked to compromise on? Sometimes the most loving thing you can do for yourself is say no.